She wed a guard in a moment of despair, unaware he was a millionaire in disguise. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. Emma stood alone outside the courthouse on that gray morning, clutching a worn envelope filled with overdue bills. The sharp wind carried the sound of traffic and honking horns, yet all she could hear was the pounding of her own heart. Her stepfather's voice still echoed in her mind from the night before. "If you do not marry Mr. Crawford, we lose everything. Do you understand? Everything." Mr. Crawford was a businessman in his late 50s, powerful and wealthy, but cruel. He treated people like possessions, and Emma knew if she stepped into that marriage, her life would no longer be her own. She had resisted for months, but the debt kept growing. Her family's tiny apartment, her mother's medication, the little dignity they had left, all of it hung in the balance. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope again. Past due notices. Final warnings. Her chest tightened. Emma pressed the stack against her chest, as if she could squeeze hope back into the paper. A tear slid down her cheek. She whispered to herself, "There has to be another way." Just then, a voice broke through the chaos. Deep, steady, almost too calm for the storm she was in. "Are you all right, miss?" Emma turned, startled. Standing a few feet away was a tall man in a plain black jacket, his stance firm like someone used to protecting others. His name, though she did not know it yet, was Jack. To her eyes, he looked like a security guard, ordinary, rough around the edges, perhaps even struggling like her. His hands were calloused, his hair a little unkempt, his boots scuffed from long shifts. Yet his eyes, they carried something rare. Steadiness, kindness. Emma wiped her face quickly, embarrassed. "I am fine," she lied, stuffing the papers back into her bag. But Jack did not move. He studied her with a quiet patience that felt disarming, as if he could see the truth she was trying to bury. "You do not look fine," he said gently. "Whoever made you cry does not deserve your tears." His words were simple, but they pierced through the numbness wrapping her chest. Emma's lips trembled. For months, she had been surrounded by threats, demands, and manipulation. And now, out of nowhere, a stranger spoke to her with more kindness than her own family had offered. The courthouse bells chimed. Her stepfather would be waiting inside, ready to drag her to the judge's chambers. Panic surged again. Emma stepped back, shaking her head. "I do not have a choice." Jack tilted his head. "Everyone has a choice." His tone was firm, almost challenging. Something in Emma snapped. "No, you do not understand," she whispered fiercely. "If I walk away, my mother loses her medicine. My stepfather loses his job. And the man they want me to marry, he owns us. He owns everything. I am trapped." Jack's jaw tightened. For a brief second, there was a flicker in his eyes, like he carried battles of his own. He lowered his voice, leaning closer. "Then let me make you a deal. Marry me instead." Emma blinked, stunned. "What?" "Marry me," Jack repeated. His voice was steady, not a trace of hesitation. "You need protection. I can give you that. It will not be forever. 1 year. A contract. I will stand between you and that man. No strings attached." Emma's heart pounded louder than the courthouse bells. She stared at this stranger, the guard who appeared out of nowhere, offering her an escape she had not dared to imagine. Her breath caught as his words sank in. A marriage. A contract. A shield against her stepfather and Mr. Crawford. But who was he really? Why would he risk himself for her? Her voice shook. "Why would you? Why would you do this for me?" Jack's gaze did not waver. "Because no one deserves to be sold like property. You deserve freedom, Emma, even if it is just borrowed time." Emma's eyes widened. She had not told him her name, yet somehow he already knew. Her pulse raced. 1,000 fears clashed inside her: distrust, suspicion, the heavy weight of desperation. But above all, there was a fragile spark of hope. Hope that this stranger, this so-called guard, might be the lifeline she had been praying for. And in that desperate moment, Emma whispered the word that would change her life forever. Yes. Oh. Emma's answer still echoed in her own ears, as if she could not believe the word had escaped her lips. Yes. The courthouse doors loomed behind her, heavy with the weight of the life she had nearly been forced into. Now, with a single word, everything had shifted. Jack studied her closely, as though making certain she had truly spoken her consent. His jaw tightened, but his eyes softened. "All right," he said firmly. "Then we make it official. But first, we need rules." Rules. The word cut through Emma's days like a blade. She had expected kindness, perhaps even pity, but not structure. Her brows furrowed. "Rules?" Jack nodded. "If we are doing this, it cannot be chaos. It will be a contract marriage. Clear terms. You agree, and I agree. No confusion." Emma's chest tightened again, but this time with a strange mix of fear and relief. Perhaps rules would give her safety, boundaries, something solid in the storm. "What kind of terms?" she asked cautiously. Jack looked around, then gestured toward a small diner across the street. They walked together in silence, Emma's thin coat wrapped tightly against the chill. The smell of coffee and fried eggs greeted them inside. They took a booth near the back, away from prying eyes. Jack folded his hands on the table. His voice was steady, deliberate. "First term. This marriage is a contract. 1 year, no longer. When the year ends, we go our separate ways. No strings attached." Emma's heart sank at the bluntness, yet she also felt a strange relief. 1 year meant escape, not a lifetime of chains. She nodded slowly. "Second term," Jack continued. "We keep our lives separate. You continue your work, your routines. I do not interfere. We only appear together when needed, to keep the arrangement believable." Emma swallowed, her fingers tracing the chipped edge of the table. It was practical, almost cold, yet she sensed a strange kindness hidden within his words. He was not trying to own her, only to shield her. "Third term," Jack said, leaning closer. "You will have protection. If anyone threatens you, your stepfather, Crawford, or anyone else you call me, you do not face them alone." Emma's throat tightened. The word protection carried more weight than she expected. For months, she had lived under constant fear, with no one willing to stand between her and danger. Now this man, this stranger, offered himself as a shield. She whispered, "And what do you want in return?" Jack held her gaze. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Finally, he spoke with quiet conviction. "Nothing, only that you respect the agreement. That is all." Emma's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. She had grown used to bargains where she lost everything, where men took her freedom in exchange for survival. But here was a man asking for nothing but respect of terms. Still, doubt gnawed at her. "Why? Why would you do this for someone you barely know?" Jack leaned back, his expression unreadable. "Because I know what it feels like to have no choice. And I will not stand by while someone else gets caged." The diner waitress interrupted with a steaming pot of coffee, setting mugs before them. Emma wrapped her hands around the cup, feeling its warmth seep into her chilled skin. She studied the man across from her. His jacket was plain, his boots scuffed, his hands roughened by labor. To her eyes, he was nothing more than a guard, perhaps even poorer than she was. Yet his words carried a gravity she could not ignore. "All right," Emma said softly. 1 year. Separate lives. Appear together when needed. You protect me, and I respect the agreement." Jack extended his hand across the table. "Then we have a deal." Emma hesitated only a moment before placing her trembling hand in his. His grip was firm, grounding, like stone beneath her feet after months of sinking sand. As their hands met, Emma realized something she dared not speak aloud. She had just bound her future to a man she hardly knew. Not out of love, not out of desire, but out of desperation. Yet, for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of something she had nearly lost. Hope. And so began the marriage that was never meant to be real. The courthouse papers were signed with the quiet efficiency of two people making a bargain rather than a vow. By the time Emma returned to the small apartment she shared with her mother, she could hardly comprehend the whirlwind that had swept her life into an entirely new direction. She was now a wife on paper, at least. A wife to a man she barely knew, a man she believed was nothing more than a guard. The early days of their arrangement were strange, marked by awkward silence and accidental collisions of two very different lives. Emma continued her job at a local diner, working long shifts, wiping tables, and pocketing every tip she earned. She counted coins carefully at night, making sure her mother's medication could be purchased on time. Jack rarely interfered. He kept to his own world, leaving early in the morning and returning late, his presence steady but never invasive. Yet living under the same roof revealed more than either of them intended. Emma noticed how Jack carried himself, even in the most ordinary routines. He stood like a man who had been trained, every movement purposeful. His eyes swept the surroundings instinctively, as if measuring threats no one else could see. To her, he was simply overcautious. She teased him once, saying, "You act like you are guarding a palace, not an apartment with broken windows." He had only smiled faintly and changed the subject. Daily clashes began to color their fragile arrangement. Emma believed in saving every cent, stretching meals with leftovers, sewing old clothes back together. Jack, on the other hand, sometimes returned with groceries that seemed far too expensive for his supposed income. Emma frowned at the fresh salmon he once laid on the counter. "This costs more than I make in a week," she protested. Jack shrugged. It was on sale. She narrowed her eyes, unconvinced, but let it go. One evening, Jack's jacket tore on the sleeve after he stopped a drunk man from harassing Emma outside the diner. She brought the garment home and mended it with careful stitches, humming softly to herself. The fabric felt unusually fine beneath her fingers, far smoother than anything a guard would wear. She paused, frowning at the thought, but quickly shook her head. Perhaps it was just durable material. She finished sewing and folded the jacket neatly. When Jack saw it later, his eyes softened in a way that unsettled her heart. Despite the clashes, moments of unexpected warmth began to slip through. Jack always made sure Emma had the warmer blanket on colder nights. When her hands ached from scrubbing dishes at the diner, he wordlessly placed a small jar of ointment on the table. She stared at it, bewildered, until he muttered, "It helps with burns and sore skin. Use it." Oh. It was not grand gestures, but small ones, steady, protective, quietly given. Emma tried to ignore the growing flutter in her chest, reminding herself over and over that this was only a contract. The midpoint of their fragile bond arrived on a stormy night. Emma had worked a double shift and returned home soaked to the bone. She collapsed on the couch, coughing from the chill. Jack entered moments later, his face tightening with alarm. Without a word, he gathered blankets, brewed tea, and sat beside her until the coughing eased. His presence filled the silence, a steady anchor against the storm outside. Emma leaned back, exhausted, her eyes meeting his in the dim light. Something shifted in that moment. She saw not just a guard, not just the man who had bargained with her at a diner table, but a soul who carried quiet burdens of his own. Her heart trembled, though she forced herself to dismiss it. "Do not mistake kindness for love," she whispered to herself when Jack stepped into the kitchen. Still, as she lay beneath the blanket he had wrapped around her, warmth spread deeper than the tea in her hands. It was the first night she dared to believe that this arrangement might be more than just survival. The days that followed settled into an uneasy rhythm. Emma woke early, hurried to the diner, and returned home late, her shoulders heavy with exhaustion. Jack continued his quiet pattern of watchfulness, rarely speaking of himself but always appearing when she needed him most. Their agreement remained intact, yet the boundary between duty and something deeper began to blur in ways Emma struggled to deny. It was on a crisp Saturday morning when the first open clash between their worlds erupted. Emma had agreed to accompany Jack to a neighborhood gathering, a casual event meant to present them as a normal couple. She wore her plainest dress, patched carefully but still modest. Jack, however, appeared in a tailored suit that looked far too refined for a man of his supposed means. The fabric gleamed under the sunlight, and heads turned as they entered. Emma felt eyes burning into her back, whispers rising around the crowd. One woman smirked and muttered loudly, she must be clinging to him for a better life. Emma flushed crimson, gripping Jack's arm for balance. She wanted to disappear. Before she could retreat, Jack's posture shifted. His body moved subtly, but it was unmistakably protective. He stepped in front of her, his voice calm, yet carrying the weight of steel. "Careful with your words," he warned the gossiping woman. Respect is free, and everyone here can afford it." The crowd fell silent. Emma's heart pounded as she clutched the sleeve of his suit. She had never seen anyone defend her so directly, not even her own family. Something deep inside her cracked open, leaving her both shaken and grateful. That night, as they returned home, Emma found the jacket she had mended earlier draped over the chair. She lifted it, remembering the way his eyes softened when he saw her stitches. Holding it close, she whispered, "Why do you keep standing up for me?" But the room gave no answer, only the steady sound of rain tapping against the window. Another test came days later when Mr. Crawford himself appeared at the diner. His eyes narrowed as he spotted Emma balancing trays and pouring coffee. "So, this is where you ran," he sneered. "Serving tables while hiding behind some hired guard?" Emma froze, her hands trembling as she tried not to drop the tray. Before she could speak, Jack appeared from the corner booth where he had been silently watching. His presence loomed, calm but commanding. "She is not hiding," Jack said evenly. "She made her choice. Leave her alone." Mr. Crawford scoffed. "Do you think you can protect her forever? Men like me always win. Remember that." Emma expected Jack to lash out, but instead he stepped closer, his voice low and deliberate. "Sometimes winning is not about power. Sometimes it is about knowing when you have already lost." The entire diner seemed to hold its breath. Mr. Crawford's smirk faltered before he finally turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Emma's knees buckled, and she sank onto the nearest chair. Jack crouched beside her, his hand steady on her shoulder. In that moment, Emma felt an unfamiliar safety wrap around her. For years, she had been forced to fight battles alone, always outnumbered, always overpowered. Now someone else stood beside her, bearing the blows she once endured in silence. That evening, she carefully hung Jack's jacket by the door, her hand lingering on the fabric. She remembered every moment he had stepped in front of her, every time he had shielded her from cruelty. Her chest tightened with emotions she could not yet name. The line between contract and something far greater blurred again. She reminded herself of the terms. 1 year, no strings, separate lives. Yet every protective glance, every quiet gesture, pulled her closer to a truth she was not ready to face. As the night deepened, Emma lay awake, listening to the rhythm of his footsteps in the next room. It was steady, like a guard keeping watch. But to her weary heart, it sounded like something else entirely. It sounded like home. Emma's days grew heavier as the season shifted toward winter. The long hours at the diner wore her down, and the constant strain of balancing debt, her mother's fragile health, and the charade of her marriage pressed like iron against her chest. Still, Jack's presence lingered like a shield she could not ignore. Each time he stepped between her and the cruel whispers of others, she felt the walls around her heart crack a little more. One bitter evening, Emma returned home drenched from icy rain after walking the long blocks back from work. She pushed open the apartment door, her teeth chattering, her limbs trembling from the cold. Jack rose from the couch immediately, his face tightening with concern. "You are freezing," he said firmly, guiding her toward the bedroom. Emma tried to protest, but a sudden cough doubled her over. Her body shook, the weight of exhaustion finally collapsing on her. Jack caught her before she could fall, his arms strong and steady as he lifted her with ease. He placed her gently on the bed and hurried to fetch blankets, a basin of warm water, and medicine he had somehow already stored in the cupboard. Through fevered haze, Emma felt the cool cloth against her forehead and the steady presence of Jack sitting at her side. His large hand held hers, grounding her as the storm of illness swept through her body. "Rest," he whispered, his voice low, almost tender. "I will take care of everything." For the first time in years, Emma allowed herself to close her eyes and trust that someone else would carry the burden, if only for a night. When dawn broke, her fever had lessened. She woke to find Jack slumped in the chair beside her, his head resting on his arm, his eyes half closed from keeping vigil through the night. The sight struck her more deeply than words could reach. This was not part of their contract. He did not owe her sleepless nights or tender care. And yet, here he was, giving more than she had ever been given. Emma reached out hesitantly, her fingertips brushing his sleeve. Jack stirred and looked at her, his gaze soft with relief. "You are awake," he said quietly. Her throat ached as she whispered, "You stayed all night." "I told you," he replied. You do not have to face things alone anymore." Her eyes burned with unshed tears. The walls she had built, the rules she clung to, all began to tremble under the weight of his quiet devotion. She wanted to tell him how much it meant, how deeply it reached into the hollow spaces of her heart. But fear held her tongue. This was only a contract. If she allowed her heart to believe otherwise, she would only face heartbreak when the year ended. Still, as she watched him rise to make tea and prepare her medicine, warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with fever. That night, Emma lay awake, listening to the rain tapping against the window. She remembered the strength of his arms, the steadiness of his voice, the softness hidden beneath his guarded exterior. For the first time, she admitted to herself, if only in silence, that she was beginning to feel something far more dangerous than gratitude. She was beginning to fall in love. Emma's health returned slowly, but the fragile peace between her and Jack did not last. The more time she spent near him, the more she noticed cracks in the story he had built for her. One evening, while gathering laundry, Emma reached into the pocket of his jacket to check for loose change. Instead, her fingers brushed against a sleek black card, embossed with a crest she had never seen before. It was not the kind of identification a simple guard would carry. She pulled it out, staring at the polished surface, her heart thudding in alarm. When Jack entered the room, his expression darkened instantly at the sight of the card in her hand. "Where did you get that?" His tone was sharper than she had ever heard. Emma stepped back, clutching the card. "From your pocket. You told me you were just a guard, but this proves you are hiding something." Jack moved closer, his eyes guarded. "It is not what you think." "Then tell me," Emma pressed, her voice trembling. "Who are you really, Jack? What are you keeping from me?" Silence filled the space between them, heavier than stone. Jack looked at her, his jaw tight, but the answer never came. He turned away, leaving her with nothing but the echo of unanswered questions. Emma's chest tightened with betrayal. For weeks she had trusted him, allowed herself to feel safe, even to feel something more than safety. And now she realized she might have been nothing more than a fool trapped in another man's deception. The next day, Emma overheard whispers outside the diner. Two well-dressed men lingered by the entrance, speaking in low voices. "He should not be here. If the board finds out he is playing guard while the company is under review, it will cause chaos." "Oh," Emma froze, the words searing into her mind. Board. Company. It was clear they were talking about Jack. Her hands shook as she served coffee to the men, her thoughts unraveling. He was not the man he claimed to be. Every kindness, every protective act, now looked like a mask. Her heart ached with a sharpness that made it difficult to breathe. That night, when Jack returned home, Emma confronted him again. "You lied to me," she whispered, tears streaking her face. "All this time, you let me believe you were someone ordinary, someone like me. And I believed you. Do you have any idea what that feels like?" Jack reached for her, but she pulled away. "This was supposed to be a contract," Emma said, her voice breaking. "I told myself not to feel anything, but you made me trust you, and now I see you are nothing like the man I thought you were." The pain in her eyes was sharper than any blade. She turned, gathering her coat and bag. Jack stood in the doorway, silent as she stepped into the night. Emma's footsteps echoed against the pavement, each one fueled by a mixture of heartbreak and fury. She did not know where she was going, only that she could no longer stay. The fragile hope she had begun to build shattered, leaving her with the bitter taste of betrayal. And in the darkness, she wondered if love was nothing more than another trap. Emma did not return to the apartment that night. Instead, she found herself walking aimlessly through the quiet streets, her coat clutched tightly around her trembling body. The city lights blurred through her tears, and every step felt heavier than the last. The sharp edges of betrayal cut deeper with each memory of Jack's steady eyes, his protective hands, and his whispered promise that she would never be alone again. For days, Emma kept her distance. She stayed at the diner later than usual, sleeping on a cot in the storage room rather than facing the silence of their home. Her coworkers noticed her hollow eyes, but she brushed away their questions with brittle smiles. Inside, however, her heart wrestled with itself. She wanted to hate Jack, to erase every ounce of trust she had given him. Yet her chest ached with the memory of his care, his vigil during her fever, the way he stood against Crawford when no one else dared. Jack, meanwhile, searched for her quietly. He did not storm the diner or demand explanations. Instead, he lingered nearby, making sure she was safe without intruding on her fragile space. Emma saw him once across the street, his tall figure shadowed beneath a lamppost. Their eyes met for a heartbeat before she turned away, her throat tightening with unspoken words. The weight of truth pressed harder when Crawford returned. Emboldened by Emma's absence from Jack, he cornered her one night after work. His smug smile twisted as he leaned too close. "Did I not tell you? Men like him will always deceive you. Come back where you belong, Emma. You cannot survive without people like me." Fear surged, but so did defiance. Emma raised her chin, her voice trembling but firm. "I would rather have nothing than ever belong to you." She tried to push past him, but Crawford's grip tightened on her wrist. Before panic could consume her, a voice rang out, low and commanding. "Let her go." Jack stepped from the shadows, his eyes ablaze with fury. His presence filled the alley like a storm, and Crawford recoiled, his grip faltering. Jack moved between them, shielding Emma with his body as he had so many times before. Crawford sneered but retreated under the weight of Jack's silent warning. Emma's knees gave way, and she stumbled. Jack caught her, his arms steady, his voice gentle now. "Are you hurt?" Tears spilled down her cheeks as she shook her head. She wanted to scream at him, to demand the truth, yet all she could manage was a broken whisper. "Why did you lie to me?" Jack's jaw tightened, and for the first time, the mask of control slipped. His voice cracked with something raw. "Because I was afraid. Afraid that if you knew who I really was, you would never see me as a man, only as a name, a fortune, a title. And I could not bear that." Emma's breath caught. The truth she had begged for was finally unraveling before her, yet it left her more conflicted than ever. She pulled away from his arms, torn between longing and anger. The night ended with silence, the distance between them deeper than any contract could measure. Emma walked away again, her heart heavy, knowing the final truth had yet to be revealed. The days that followed were heavy with silence. Emma returned to the apartment only to gather her belongings, her eyes avoiding Jack's every attempt to meet her gaze. She carried her pain like a shield, determined not to let him break through again. Yet deep inside, a storm raged, part anger, part longing, part confusion she could not untangle. Meanwhile, Jack faced a storm of his own. The world he had tried to escape finally cornered him. A lavish gala was scheduled downtown, hosted by the very board of directors who demanded his presence. His disguise as a guard could no longer hold. They wanted the air, not the shadow. Jack knew the night would strip away every lie he had built. Emma learned of the gala through whispers at the diner. A wealthy customer scoffed at the headlines in his paper. The young heir finally returns. About time he stopped pretending to be ordinary. Emma froze, the mug in her hand nearly slipping. The name printed in bold letters matched the man she had lived with, the man she thought she had known. Her chest tightened with betrayal all over again. Still, a part of her needed to see it with her own eyes. That evening, she stood among the crowd gathered outside the glittering hotel. Cameras flashed as limousines pulled up, and when Jack stepped out, dressed in a tailored suit that gleamed under the lights, the truth was undeniable. He was not a guard. He was a millionaire heir, moving with the confidence of a man born to command. Emma's breath caught. Around her, people whispered with admiration and envy, their eyes fixed on the powerful figure before them. Yet to her, he was still the man who had stitched blankets around her shoulders, who had held her hand when fever consumed her. The contrast left her dizzy. Inside the ballroom, Jack addressed the board, his voice steady and resolute. "You want me to return because of my name, because of the fortune tied to it. But I will not let this title control who I am. I will not let it harm the people I care about." Reporters scribbled furiously, flashes of cameras capturing every word. Jack's gaze swept the room, and for a fleeting moment, it landed on Emma standing at the edge of the crowd. His voice softened almost imperceptibly. "True strength is not in wealth or power. It is in choosing integrity, even when it costs you everything." The declaration stunned the room. Some gasped. Others murmured in disbelief. Jack had just risked his inheritance. his status, his carefully built empire, all with a single choice. Emma's throat tightened as tears blurred her vision. For the first time, she understood. His disguise, his secrecy, his fear, it had never been meant to mock her. It had been meant to protect her, to protect something real between them. Yet the wound of betrayal still pulsed raw and deep. She turned from the ballroom, her heart aching with both admiration and pain. Behind her, Jack stood taller than ever, but his eyes lingered on the door where Emma had just disappeared. As though nothing in the glittering hall mattered more than the woman walking away. Emma walked quickly through the night air, her steps echoing against the pavement as she tried to outrun the confusion in her chest. The gala lights glowed behind her, fading into the distance, but Jack's words still clung to her heart. Integrity. Choosing what was right, even when it cost everything. She had seen him give up wealth, give up reputation, give up the protection of his title. He had done it not for power, but for love. For days, Emma wrestled with herself. Anger told her to stay away, to protect the fragile pieces of her heart from breaking again. But another voice whispered, reminders she could not silence: the way he stayed up through the night when she was ill, the way he stood in front of her when Crawford threatened, the way he looked at her, not as a burden, but as a partner. One evening, as Emma closed the diner, she stepped outside and froze. Jack stood across the street, waiting, his suit traded for the plain jacket she had mended long ago. He looked nothing like the millionaire heir who had stunned the city. He looked like the man who had promised her she would never face battles alone. She hesitated, her heart racing. Jack crossed the street slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. When he reached her, he spoke with quiet humility. Emma, I cannot undo the lies. I cannot change the fear that made me hide. But I can stand here, without titles, without wealth, and tell you the truth. I love you, not as a contract, not as an arrangement, but as the woman who taught me what it means to be real. Aishal. Emma's breath trembled, tears filled her eyes, but this time they were not born of pain alone. She saw the sincerity in him, the man who had chosen her over fortune, the man who had proven his love with action rather than words. She stepped closer, her voice breaking. You hurt me, Jack. But you also protected me, cared for me, and gave me back the hope I thought I had lost. I cannot forget that. Jack lowered his head. If you give me one more chance, there will be no contracts, no secrets, only us. For a long moment, Emma stood in silence. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out the jacket she had kept since the night she sewed it back together. She held it out to him, her hands trembling. I kept this because it reminded me of the man you were when no one was watching. That is the man I fell for, and that is the man I want to spend my life with. Jack's eyes burned as he took the jacket, his hands closing over hers. Relief and joy lit his face, more powerful than any riches he had ever known. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if he would never let go again. And under the quiet glow of the streetlight, Emma whispered the words that turned their contract into forever. This time, Jack, it is real. The story closed not with wealth or titles, but with the triumph of love, earned through sacrifice, integrity, and the courage to choose each other. For Emma and Jack, what began as a desperate bargain ended as a true marriage of hearts, sealed not by paper, but by devotion.